It looked like any other shift. Amy Hatfield walked through the gates of HMP Lindholm just after 7 a.m. Uniform pressed, ID checked, nothing unusual. Until officers pulled her aside. They asked her to open her bag. Inside, a few bottles of Ribena, nothing alarming at first glance. But when they twisted the cap, the smell said otherwise. What happened next would unravel something far bigger than anyone expected. This is the story of a prison nurse, and how she became the gateway to Britain's largest ever jailhouse drug network. Amy Hatfield wasn't a new recruit. She joined HMP Lindholm in September 2018, assigned as a mental health support worker. Her job was to assess vulnerable inmates, those with psychological needs, signs of breakdown, or suicidal thoughts. It was trusted and quiet work, the kind that granted her regular, unsupervised access across the prison. To most, she appeared professional, efficient, and reliable. She wasn't flashy, didn't draw attention. If anything, she kept her head down. But in hindsight, the signs were there. Hatfield had begun arranging frequent mental health sessions with certain prisoners, far more often than protocol allowed. While most inmates waited weeks for assessments, some were seen 2 or 3 times a week, always the same names. No one questioned it at first. She was, after all, a professional. Behind those sessions, packages were being passed. She was careful, small bundles hidden in paper folders, items dropped off during routine checks. No confrontation, no raised voices, just paperwork, conversation, and quiet handovers no one noticed. Drugs weren't arriving through the fence. They were being walked in, one shift at a time. And Hatfield wasn't just the delivery route, she was central to it. The woman trained to care for prisoners' minds had become the one feeding their addictions. The turning point came in the summer of 2019. That's when Amy Hatfield started seeing more of inmate Joseph Whittingham. At first, it was subtle. Extra mental health appointments, longer sessions behind closed doors. But soon, prison staff began to notice the unusual frequency. Some questioned it. Others assumed it was part of her role. What they didn't know was that the relationship had moved far beyond professional. Hatfield had become emotionally involved, infatuated even. Whittingham was already serving time, but inside those walls, he'd found influence. He had people, access. And now, through Hatfield, he had something far more valuable, a route in and out. The affair escalated quickly. They met for sexual contact during her shifts, used smuggled phones to exchange explicit photos, talked about life after prison. Love letters were later found hidden in cells, full of plans, promises, and coded language. Both had partners outside. Neither seemed to care. It wasn't just a fling, it was strategic. Whittingham knew how to manipulate. Hatfield, once trained to spot manipulation, couldn't see it happening to her. Or maybe didn't want to, because by then, she wasn't just in love, she was already deep inside the conspiracy. Inside Lindholm, a core group of inmates took over. They didn't wait for orders. They ran the system. There were 6 of them at the core: Joseph Whittingham, Jordan Needham, Kieran Murphy, Anthony Campbell, Anise Williamson, and William Francis. Each had a role and each had a reach. Whittingham used his influence to take orders and direct payments. Jordan Needham, 31, was already serving a sentence for supplying Class A drugs. He controlled supply chains on the wing and pressured vulnerable inmates to test new batches of spice. Kieran Murphy, 26, was in for firearms offences. He sourced items and orchestrated deliveries. Intelligence later revealed he had arranged for knives to be smuggled in, with plans to harm a prison officer. Anthony Campbell, 38, was doing a life sentence for arranging the murder of a 16-year-old boy in Liverpool, using his mother to coordinate, but we will talk about it later. Phones smuggled in by Hatfield became the lifeline for deals, threats, and coordination. Anise Williamson, 30, was inside for violent offences. He used his girlfriend and sister to receive deliveries and pass parcels during prison visits. Then there was William Francis, 56, who was already under investigation for drug smuggling before this plot tied him in. He'd supplied heroin, spice, and cannabis into prisons across the region. These weren't casual dealers. They were organized and discreet. Some had served time in other prisons and simply carried the model across. They knew what sold, what inmates craved, and how to keep order through intimidation. Contraband didn't just bring profit, it brought control. They decided who got what, who paid, and who owed. In a place where currency was survival, controlling the drugs meant controlling everything. And for a while, they ran Lindholm from the inside. While the operation brought in money and influence, it left something else in its wake: dead bodies. Between 2018 and 2019, 7 inmates at HMP Lindholm died in incidents linked to spice. The synthetic drug had become the most traded substance inside the prison, cheap to produce, easy to conceal, and devastatingly unpredictable. One of those deaths was Kyle Batsford. In September 2019, Batsford was bullied into testing a new batch of spice brought into the prison. He collapsed shortly after. Toxicology reports later confirmed that the substance matched the same batch found in Amy Hatfield's possession the following month. He wasn't the only one forced to take risks. Another inmate was pushed to try a separate batch. Within hours, he slipped into a coma. He would survive, but the damage was irreversible. 10 days unconscious. When he woke, he'd lost the use of his legs and most of his sight. Even the staff weren't immune. Several officers and healthcare workers reported symptoms after accidental exposure to second-hand spice fumes on the wings. The prison became saturated. Access was too easy and supply was constant. And the damage wasn't theoretical. It was visible, routine, and escalating. But after Hatfield's arrest, something changed. In the 8 months that followed, not a single spice-related death was recorded inside Lindholm. While the prison walls held the main players, the network's strength came from beyond them. In living rooms, bedrooms, and bank accounts, through partners, parents, and siblings across the country. This wasn't a one-off smuggling job. It was a coordinated operation built on trust, silence, and family loyalty. At the center was Deborah Stoddard, 56, mother of convicted murderer Anthony Campbell. She wasn't a reluctant participant. She was a driving force. Stoddard arranged visitor drops, sourced the drugs herself, and laundered profits. Even when Campbell was placed in segregation, the supply lines she maintained kept him in business. She'd done it before too, smuggling drugs into other prisons during his earlier transfers. Courtney Ward, 26, was deeply tied to Jordan Needham. The court heard she'd been in a controlling relationship since she was 18. But it didn't stop her from playing a key role. She arranged payments, sourced contacts, and communicated with Hatfield directly. Ward even discussed the idea of paying the nurse a daily fee to keep the deliveries moving. Jordan's mother, Audrey Needham, was also involved. She received funds from inmates' families, held them briefly, and forwarded them on. Prosecutors called her a financial middlewoman, someone who exploited almost every possible avenue to keep her son's trade alive. Then there was Lucy Whittingham, wife of Joseph. She fronted as an unsuspecting spouse, but the evidence showed regular bank transfers tied to prison deals. Alongside her, Joseph's father, Paul Whittingham, 59, was also caught moving money tied to smuggled contraband. Leighton Kemp, 29, wasn't family, but he was a known associate of Jordan Needham. He coordinated drops and moved cash between locations. His digital footprint showed repeated contact with Hatfield, including during key delivery windows. Cora Haley, 30, was the girlfriend of inmate Anise Williamson. CCTV caught her handing over a package during a prison visit. Phone records showed her discussing drug deliveries and laundering money with Williamson's sister. That sister, Natalie Williamson, 35, ran her own part of the chain. She stored money, sent instructions, and transferred profits. Texts recovered from Haley's phone included Natalie asking for cash to be sent same day. Lydia Pinnington, 23, linked to Campbell's side of the network, was found with messages referring to the movement of drug funds. While cleared of conspiracy charges, she pleaded guilty to laundering money connected to the operation. The list of suspects still continues, with Lee Holmes, 44, wasn't tied by blood, but he played a background role. DNA evidence linked him to drugs seized from Hatfield, and records showed visits to her home in the weeks before her arrest. William Francis, 56, was the final piece. Already under suspicion for a separate prison smuggling case, his financial links to the Lindholm plot confirmed his role. He later admitted to supplying heroin, spice, and cannabis. Across homes in Nottingham, Liverpool, Bradford, and beyond, this was a web of everyday people. Sons, daughters, parents. Some claimed they were tricked. Others admitted they knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just helping inmates, they were keeping the network alive. Amy Hatfield wasn't the only smuggling route. As police peeled back the layers of the Lindholm conspiracy, they found a network that had adapted, diversified, and evolved, constantly searching for new ways to beat the system. Some methods were bold, others were quiet, but all were calculated. Drones had become a growing problem. Lightweight, fast, and nearly silent, they could drop packages directly into the prison yard under cover of darkness. No physical contact, no witnesses, just a GPS pin and a waiting pair of hands. Catapults were another tactic. A high fence wasn't a barrier, it was just a challenge. Packages were launched from nearby land, sometimes wrapped in socks, other times disguised in everyday items. Retrieval teams inside the prison knew when and where to look. Fake legal mail was also exploited. Envelopes marked confidential were used to smuggle spice-soaked paper and SIM cards, bypassing routine inspections. Staff, under pressure and stretched thin, couldn't check every document without risking breach of legal protocols. Then there were visits, social, medical, or fabricated. In one case, Cora Haley was filmed passing a package to her partner, Anise Williamson, during a routine prison visit. The footage was clear. The handover was fast. Even hospital appointments were manipulated. Inmates deliberately sought referrals. Every weakness in the system was tested. Some methods failed, others succeeded. But none of it relied on chance. The Lindholm network didn't just exploit people, it exploited processes, paperwork, schedules, and gaps in staff numbers. Assumptions that no one would try something twice. And for a while, it worked. The network had lasted for over a year. Profits were flowing, deliveries were frequent, and inside the prison, inmates had access to almost any drug they wanted. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Anti-corruption officers had been watching Amy Hatfield for weeks. A tip-off had triggered the interest. Whispers about a relationship with an inmate, strange patterns in her schedule, unexplained wealth. On October 24th, 2019, just after 7 a.m., they made their move. Hatfield was stopped as she arrived for her morning shift. Officers searched her belongings. Inside, they found 4 bottles of Ribena, but the liquid inside wasn't juice, it was spice. 2 liters of it, enough to soak thousands of sheets, enough to flood entire prison wings. And that was just the start. In her bag, officers also found MDMA, ketamine, cannabis, along with a few testosterone vials, anabolic steroids, tobacco, and prescription drugs. It all had an estimated prison value of over £1 million. Apart from drugs, mobile phones, charging cables, SIM cards were also hidden and wrapped in cling film, tucked inside everyday items. It was all carefully packed, precisely prepared, and nothing left to chance. The list still had not ended. She'd even smuggled in knives, carbon fiber lock blades. She didn't resist. She simply said she had some stuff on her. But that search was just the beginning. The same day, officers searched the mental health unit where she worked and found more. Another liter of spice. Notes, and packaging materials. And when they checked her phone, hundreds of messages, contacts, and bank transfers tied to inmates and their families. Cells were raided, phones were seized, charging cables, drugs, and handwritten notes containing bank details were uncovered. Then came the strike. On December 18th, police carried out simultaneous raids across the country. 60 officers, multiple properties, co-conspirators arrested in Nottingham, Liverpool, Bradford, and beyond. Each device analysed. Each account is traced. What started with a single search turned into the collapse of the UK's largest ever prison drugs conspiracy. A 4-year investigation followed, slow, methodical, and relentless. And one by one, the names fell into place. The courtroom doors opened in April 2023, nearly 4 years after Amy Hatfield's arrest. The case was heard at Sheffield Crown Court, one of the largest prison conspiracy cases ever brought before a UK judge. It wasn't a staggered process. All 17 defendants were brought into court across a 19-week trial, supported by evidence gathered from thousands of seized messages, prison surveillance logs, financial records, and forensic drug analysis. The Crown's case was clear. This was a highly organised, multi-layered criminal network operating across the prison system and the wider community. Prosecutor Gordon Stables detailed how drugs, weapons, and phones were moved with precision, and how families on the outside helped launder the proceeds. He told the court that, essentially, any drugs inmates sought were made available inside HMP Lindholm, and pointed to the 7 deaths that occurred during the height of the conspiracy. Most defendants entered early guilty pleas. A few, including Paul Whittingham and Lydia Pinnington, contested elements of the charges, facing jury trials within the same court window. Where defences were mounted, they centred around claims of coercion. Some argued they were manipulated by family or romantic partners behind bars. Others said they were unaware of what was being passed or moved. The court rejected most of these claims, pointing to message histories and transaction records showing repeated, coordinated involvement. Her Honour Judge Kirsty Watson presided. Her tone was firm. She described the operation as an instrument of exploitation, oppression, and power, condemning the way inmates had been weaponized and controlled through addiction, debt, and intimidation. She spoke directly to Hatfield during sentencing, calling her relationship with Whittingham a significant breach of trust, and stating she had abused her position to convey prohibited items for financial gain. Then came the sentences, delivered across October 2023, with one final defendant sentenced in December. Amy Hatfield, 38 of Barnsley, was convicted of conspiracy to convey Class A and B drugs, mobile phones, knives into prison, and money laundering. She was sentenced to 10 years and 2 months in prison. Joseph Whittingham, 35, already serving time at HMP Leeds, admitted conspiracy to supply Class B drugs and to convey drugs, phones, and a knife into prison. He received a further sentence of 11 years and 4 months. Anthony Campbell, 38, of HMP Dovegate, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply Class B drugs and to smuggle drugs and mobile phones into prison. He was sentenced to 11 years, to begin after eligibility for parole on his existing life term. Kieran Murphy, 26, also of HMP York Course, was found guilty of conspiring to convey knives into prison. He had already admitted to smuggling drugs and phones. He was sentenced to 7 years and 9 months. Jordan Needham, 31, of HMP Dovegate, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply Class A and B drugs and to convey drugs and phones into prison. He was handed a 9-year and 6-month sentence. Courtney Ward, 26, of Nottingham, admitted her role in supplying Class A and B drugs. She was jailed for 4 years and 6 months. Audrey Needham, 56, from the same address, was convicted of supplying Class B drugs and laundering proceeds. She received a sentence of 4 years and 3 months. Deborah Stoddard, 56, of Liverpool, was one of the conspiracy's key organisers. She pleaded guilty to supplying drugs, conveying phones and knives into prison, and laundering money. She was sentenced to 9 years and 6 months. Leighton Kemp, 29, of Nottingham, admitted his role in conveying drugs and phones into the prison and laundering the proceeds. He was jailed for 5 years. Cora Haley, 30, of Bradford, was caught passing packages during prison visits. She was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months for supplying drugs, smuggling phones, and money laundering. Anise Williamson, 30, of HMP Leeds, pleaded guilty to smuggling Class B drugs and phones into the prison. He was sentenced to 5 years and 5 months. Natalie Williamson, 35, of Shipley, admitted laundering money and being concerned in drug supply. She received a 12-month custodial sentence. Lee Holmes, 44, of County Durham, was convicted of supplying Class B drugs, conveying them into prison, and laundering profits. He was jailed for 2 years and 3 months. Lucy Whittingham, 37, and Paul Whittingham, 59, of Bradford, admitted laundering money for her husband Joseph and son. Both received a 2-year and 20-month suspended sentence and community order, respectively. Lydia Pinnington, 23, of Liverpool, pleaded guilty to money laundering. She received a suspended sentence of 14 months and a community order. William Francis, 56, of Nottingham, admitted to possession with intent to supply Class A and B drugs and to conveying them into prison. His sentence was pending at the time of reporting. If you've watched this far, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you make of the sentences handed down? Were they enough, given the scale of the damage inside Lindholm? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more real UK crime stories like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll bring you the next case, one network at a time.